Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 9th of January 2024. It's about time I went full Kanuke. So that's what I'm doing. Right, let's go to the general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply to this as well. You can find them in the description to the video below. 820 personnel lost is a pretty high number, and higher than yesterday when we had only in the 400s, almost certainly due to the pretty challenging weather conditions in Ukraine at the moment. Goodness me, it was even snowing on the south coast of the UK yesterday, so there you go. 5 tanks, 9 APVs and 6 artillery systems is right down at the lower end of the range for all of those categories, particularly the APVs and artillery systems. Again, possibly as a result of the weather. So although personnel has ticked back up, there could be a lag on the equipment losses there from the data collection side of things. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 10 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 5 pieces of special equipment. So nothing too significant, although 820 personnel lost is pretty huge. As someone said the other day, imagine if that was a year ago, 6 months ago, probably a year ago, that would have been a really high number, because 1,000 was the highest end of the range, and it was pretty amazing. You got to 1,820 was significant. Now we are thinking, if it's below 1,000, then it's somehow kind of low. But no, that's a staggering number still. So we must remember that. And of course, remember, these are all human beings when we talk numbers. Here is Andrew Perpetua's lost list for yesterday. He goes through all the social media threads and platforms to scour them for information and geolocations, and this is what he comes up with. This is the kind of ratio that the Ukrainians would really want. That's about, 5-to-1, 6-to-1 maybe ratio. Really good news for the Ukrainians there. Let's look at the value, comparative value. We have a couple of T-64s, T-72, Max Pro MRAP, but yeah, nothing too high level there. Boat and comms tower. Then when we look at the Russian losses, there's some significant ones here. Okay, so air defense system destroyed, Strela 10, that's a short range air defense system. That's not the highest value, but still they'll rue that. Tirada 2 is an anti-satellite communication electronic warfare system. And I think that's really quite high value. That's been in the occupied territories, I think, since 2018 or something like that. And they found it with the Gimlers and taken it out with the Gimlers. I think that is a significant hit. We've got some artillery there, quite a few bits of howitzers. We've got a Tornado S. We've got the 240mm mortar and some big cannons. Then when we go down to the tanks, there's a T90M, most recent tank, doing 2 T90Ms, goodness me. So that is significant. They are losing some of their more recent tanks again. I'd like to see I'd love to know the exact numbers of T90Ms they've got left. They only started the war with 100 of those, right? And they have lost, I'm pretty sure when I last did a synopsis, and that was a long time ago, there's sort of 40% of them lost. There's 40 T90Ms lost. So I think they won't have all that many T90Ms left, and that's their breakthrough tank. That's their most expensive, newest tank, other than the much mocked T14 Armata. Okay, in terms of BMP, infantry fighting vehicles, although that's literally what BMP means. There's a number lost there, mainly BMP2s, a couple of BMP1s, and so on and so forth, BMD as well, and some trucks as per normal, and civilian vehicles and unknown bits of kit that are so destroyed, or the quality of the footage is so poor you can't tell what they are. This is interesting, that he's got an unknown thing destroyed by a Bogdana. Now, weak evidence thermal signature exists, so that's a bit of footage I was thinking about showing you, but actually the quality, as you can see here, the quality of the footage isn't great. But the claim is that a Bogdana did that, which is good news. That's the indigenously manufactured self-propelled howitzer that the Ukrainians have, and they now have more of. Sort of I guess, equivalent to the Caesar, but just a lot cheaper. Probably not quite as good, but when you can have six, I don't know how much cheaper they are, but if you can have multiple Bogdanas to a single Caesar, then and you can make them yourself, then that's probably a good thing. Right, because remember, when you have indigenously manufactured equipment, it's not just about the sustainability of procurement for equipment. It's about generating jobs as well, and then tax revenue. So you're not just paying money out to France for a bunch of Caesars. You're saying, right, okay, we can make these Bogdanas in Ukraine. It might not be quite as good technologically speaking, but man, they are creating jobs, and the supply chains for those jobs and for the manufacturing process means that that's a money multiplier, and that then gives more tax to the tax coffers, so on and so forth. So there is a lot of good rationale, good justification for building stuff back in Ukraine, right? Russian Telegram channels report that Arman Aspanov, a Russian colonel and head of the armored service of the Russian Airborne Forces, so he's a pretty high up guy, went to the occupied territories of Ukraine to raise the morale of personnel. He did raise the morale, but of the Ukrainians, because he stepped on a mine and died. So that is, another high-ranking individual in the Russian armed services perishing. Here we have a Ukrainian drone filming, and I believe, I don't know if it's this footage, I've seen this a number of times, but the Ukrainians are laughing on it because basically the Russians are bombing themselves. So Ukrainian drone film, the moment the Russian infantry is being bombed by their own artillery and multiple launch rocket system. I mean, there's a couple of these kind of incidents I'm going to talk about today. There's another one. What I'd like to know is and I did ask Ukraine the latest this several times as a podcast. They haven't dealt with it as a segment as far as I'm aware, but I have asked what the evidence is for friendly fire from both sides during a war, and which side is doing that more than the other. And it's famously, Challenger tank has never been destroyed by an enemy by enemy fire, but it was in the Iraq War taken out. One of them was taken out by friendly fire, and this stuff happens. The question is, does one side perpetrate more friendly fire incidents than the other? But anyway, I've seen a number from the Russians, that's for sure. So just intuitively at the moment, I'd say the Russians do that more, but that could be a selection bias in my own viewing habits. Another of Russia's $6.5 million TOS-1 thermobaric launchers that will no longer be seen in Putin's dictator worship parades on Red Square. And this is in Avdiivka. That has been geolocated as well. That is another loss of another TOS-1A thermobaric munition or launcher. And these are somewhat vulnerable because they only have a range of about 6 kilometers, so they have to get fairly close to the front line, which means they do become more vulnerable. Right. Now, in the Sverdlovsk region in Russia, an explosive device detonated on the railway tracks near an oil depot in Nizhny Tagil. According to Russian media, an explosive device went off under the tank. Another one was found nearby that didn't explode. This got quite a lot of news. So this is where it is, 1,600 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, and this suggests some partisan activity or sabotage. There is an oil depot near the San Donato station from which a train with full oil tankers departed. 2 explosive devices were found, one of which damaged the tanker and the railway tracks, while the other failed to detonate. There are currently no photos from the scene. I don't know how much damage was done, but it was widely reported. Different sources talking about it. Here you go. I don't know if there was wide-scale fire, whether many of the tankers were blown up, or whether it's just damaged the train and a bit of derailing. Who knows? But that could be a potentially really big hit there, or not. Well, it certainly has caused some inconvenience for the Russians. Right. Going to distance strikes. A third person died overnight in Khmelnytsky of injuries received in yesterday morning's missile strike. So this is not the one from... No, it didn't seem to be any strikes last night, or no widespread ones anyway. The strikes from the night before that I said were pretty bad, actually, and quite a lot of missiles got through because they used a lot of ballistic missiles and Kinjals and whatnot. and Khmelnytsky was hit, and I've seen photos of some of the damage done there. That you haven't, as Tim White says here, there have still been no satisfactory photos released of the site, which raises suspicions military targets may have been hit. That's how I understand it. I have seen some photos, and I think they've been going for the military-industrial complex, particularly in that area, and there would have been some success there. So that is a real challenge for the Ukrainians. Rebar reports on the strikes over the last week, really from the 3rd of January to the 8th. Why I'm highlighting this is because, do you know what? Words mean quite a lot. Russian troops launched a series of massive strikes against enemy targets in several regions of the so-called Ukraine. What do you mean the so-called Ukraine? Everyone calls it Ukraine. What do you mean the so-called Ukraine? Oh, you mean Russia. You just think it's Russia. Right. Again, tells you all you need to know. Let's not beat around the bush and think this is anything other than direct aggressive imperialism from Russia. I don't want to hear anything else from any pro-Kremlin voice troll in my threads. It's just aggressive militaristic imperialism. Right, Ukraine shot down one of the first documented Iranian Shahed 238s with a jet engine. So this is a step up. And why this is challenging is because, as this source says, they can't be intercepted by machine, or at least it's more difficult to avoid being intercepted by machine guns and mobile machine gun groups and whatnot. These go a lot quicker, and or allegedly they're not produced in Russia. Russia buys them to avoid them being intercepted by machine gun groups, so that Ukraine has to waste air defense missiles on them. So it's not so much about the damage these things can do when they hit, although that's obviously going to be a bit of a challenge too. Otherwise you wouldn't bother shooting them down at all. But it's more about getting the Ukrainians to waste their precious air defense missiles on these. They are going to be more expensive for the Russians than the propeller, the mopeds that fly through the air. But they would, there's that advantage that they would attract more Ukrainian usage of expensive air defense missiles, so that extra cost would be well worth it. Tim White then says, here's another example of friendly fire. We've already talked about that with artillery. Well, here we have the Russians admitting that they have once again bombed their own in Rubizhne, which is a city in Luhansk, near Severodonetsk. This time an emergency discharge of an aerial bomb hit the town of Rubizhne. No photos yet, but I imagine there are victims, he says. Although, there are claims that no one was hurt. Residents of nearby houses were quickly evacuated, etc., etc. That does seem to be happening quite a few times. And in fact, here we have a UMP kit with an unexploded Russian bomb falling on Ukrainian positions. And why this is significant is that it allows the Ukrainians to do a bit of intel, to find out how they put these things together. This is, a perfectly serviceable weapon, although it didn't go off. I mean, you can just get a good idea of what's going on there. We'll return to this subject actually in the other section in a second, and then this bridge that was hit in Mariupol, near Mariupol, that joins the new I don't know if the bridge joins it or whether it's on the new railway that's being constructed to go along the south from Rostov-on-Don through to Mariupol. Daniela, who I spoke with on Tochny, and I'll be uploading that video today. Can you recall the bridge we discussed before? We've delved into its details extensively in the past few months over at Tochny. As it turns out, what I and others had predicted came true. The Ukrainians destroyed the bridge. It's a reminder of the effort I put into studying it. All the extensive construction work that was done on the bridge now goes to waste, as it's no longer possible to use it to connect the northern Mariupol line to the deep east. This is really significant hit, I think, by the Ukrainians, and exactly what you would have expected. As soon as they announced they're building a railway, I was like, they're going to hit that. And if you're going to hit a railway, you're going to hit a bridge. You're not going to hit the railway itself, because you can easily replace railway lines, but you can't easily replace a bridge. Smack that bridge, game over for that railway. What a waste of resources. and I'm sure you could just keep doing that as soon as they rebuild the bridge, and then or you keep doing it, or they put valuable air defense assets there, which leaves them open somewhere else. So Belgorod was witnessing more explosions yesterday. There's talk about them evacuating children from Belgorod and all sorts. So the Russians are taking this quite seriously. Russia's air defense fire can be seen, and air raid sirens have been sounding in the city. So, as I've talked about before, as long as the Ukrainians are going for those military targets around Belgorod, this is very useful for, getting Russians to realize, what war is and what they have done in aggressively invading Ukraine, because they're getting a piece of their own medicine there. Right. Okay. We're moving on to other bits and pieces, and this goes back to the drone subject. Military intelligence claims the capture of Russian drone producers' classified data. So the HUR, Ukrainian intelligence, have seized 100 gigabytes of classified data worth about $1.5 billion from the Russian company Special Technology Center, the agency said on January the 8th. This will be a huge haul. This will hopefully be useful for the Ukrainians. Within that 100 gigabytes of data, you would hope, and they would hope, that there is something very useful for them, so that they can either, match the Russians in any technological advances, or know how to counter any new technological weaponry that the Russians can throw at the Ukrainians. So that is a huge bit of news. In all honesty, potentially, it might have just got their personnel data and know who's been paid bonuses this month. I doubt it. I doubt anyone's being paid a bonus in Russia at the moment. Right. Apart from Putin. The SBU reveals it had an opportunity to sink the Russian frigate Admiral Essen. So this was after the Moskva was sunk. If you remember, the flagship in the Black Sea was sunk. Then the Admiral Essen became the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. While the Sea Babies were traveling towards Crimea, the Crimean Bridge, to destroy it, they encountered the Admiral Essen. However, priority was given to cut the logistics. So they could have taken out the Essen, apparently, but they decided to carry on with the Sea Babies to go to the Crimean Bridge, and that was the decision there. What would, I guess, I don't know if you can really calculate what would have been a better choice. What are the ramifications of taking out the Essen? I'm sure that's a cruise missile carrying ship. And it would have been a sore loss for the Russians to have lost the second flagship in the Black Sea Fleet. I don't know. I'd err on the side of the Essen being a more valuable target, but from the Sea Babies, because the main damage to the bridge, of course, was caused by that lorry, what seems to be the lorry exploding on there. Okay, Moscow region continues to freeze. I've reported on this for a number of days, but just to let you know that there's lots of video footage coming out that the fourth day, people still freezing. Fourth day without heating. Everyone who could has already self-evacuated, says residents of Elektrostal near Moscow showed what their house looks like. Quite, the entrance is completely frozen. All the radiators destroyed. It's 5 degrees Celsius in our apartments. Those who stayed are surviving as best they can with gas, all kinds of heating devices, a resident of the house said in a video. In another house on a similar street, radiators burst on every floor from the 1st to the 9th, and somewhere the walls began to rot from dampness and cold. Residents of another place near Moscow recorded a video message to Putin complaining about the lack of heating, which I think is one I shared with you, and residents of Dmitrov near Moscow also left without heating, so on and so forth. And it's just interesting that nothing seems to be done by the authorities in any timely fashion about these issues, but also the idea that actually there are so many systemic problems with the heating and whatnot. Accidents at utility companies are systemic, and the Russian authorities can't handle them. I think, with that, it's very difficult to actually solve it in one fell swoop. Issues for the Russians, and also for those in nice hot places. So meanwhile, an aero flight is stranded, broken down in Thailand. So the issues still with aviation, civil aviation. 400 Russians could not return from their New Year holidays today. Russian national carriers flying out spare parts to repair the problem to allow the Phuket-Moscow flight to depart tomorrow. The civil aviation industry is really stinging from sanctions. And then another transport problem for Russia. This was widely reported yesterday. It's 14 freight wagons derailed on the Alur-Bushile section of the Trans-Baikal Railway. Earlier, they said 27 came off the tracks. 2 big passenger trains, Moscow-Vladivostok and Chita-Blagoveshchensk, are blocked in freezing conditions. And that is, being reported quite a lot. These, I think there was coal on board one of these trains. So things are great on the railroads of the Great Empire of Russia. Traffic is suspended on Trans-Siberian Railroad after 2 cargo trains collided on that section in Zabaykalye. 14 train cars with coal derailed. And remember, Russia is still extracting effectively stolen coal from occupied territories in Ukraine, just like they are with the grain. No need for sabotage. Russia is good at self-sabotage. So, issues there. And indeed, talking about stolen grain, Russia is still stealing grain from Ukraine. Remember that. New ships of interest, new addition to Russia's grain theft operation, the Guinea-Bissau flag cargo vessel GAM Express, which changed flags 19 times in the last 15 years. Interesting. So really, it's effectively a ghost ship. Transited Bosphorus en route to occupied Theodosia after waiting in Marmara for 1 month. It was Syrian flagged as well. So, it tells you all you need to know, I guess, about that ship. Stolen grain is still an issue. Right, thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Please check out the wonderful interview I had. I really enjoyed it, as I do all of my interviews, with Ada Wordsworth from HARP Charity. That's on the live tab. Please click on that and check that out. It was a really worthwhile conversation, and the work that she's doing is absolutely fabulous. I'm also hoping to speak to Greg Terry, giving us an update. That'll be 2:30 my time, so about 4 hours time from the time of recording right now. Please keep your eyes and ears peeled for that one. I don't know, can you keep your eyes peeled? Toodle pips.